I'm Rosie, 58 years old, and never in my wildest dreams did I imagine I'd be changing the locks on my own home. The beautiful colonial house in suburban Boston, where I raised my son Thomas, where I nursed my late husband Frank through his final days. The same house where my daughter-in-law, Allison, left that card on Thanksgiving. Family trip, clean the house before we're back. I simply smiled. But when they returned to find their keys didn't work, Allison fainted right on my doorstep. Let me tell you what led to that moment. Before I dive into the story, where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below, hit that like button, and subscribe to hear more stories about standing your ground when family crosses the line. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this ends. My life used to have a comfortable rhythm to it. 32 years as an elementary school teacher, raising Thomas alongside my husband Frank, and then easing into what I thought would be a peaceful retirement. That all changed 5 years ago when Frank's heart attack took him from me without warning. The grief was overwhelming, but I found solace in the familiar walls of our family home, the beautiful two-story colonial I had inherited from my parents, paid off long ago and filled with decades of memories. I was just beginning to find my footing as a widow when Thomas called with news that shook my world again. He and Allison had fallen on hard times financially. His architecture firm had downsized, and with 2 children under 10, their mortgage had become unmanageable. "Just temporarily, Mom," he promised, "until we get back on our feet." How could I say no to my only son? The house had 4 bedrooms, plenty of space for all of us. And, truthfully, I welcomed the company after years of rattling around alone since Frank's passing. The first few months were actually lovely. My grandchildren, Emma and Jack, filled the house with laughter, and I treasured our after-school baking sessions and bedtime stories. But looking back, I should have noticed the warning signs in Allison's behavior from the start. It began with small things, rearranging my kitchen cabinets without asking, commenting that my decor was outdated, and suggesting we should refresh the living room. Then came the more obvious power moves, scheduling family meals without checking if I had plans inviting her friends over, while I was trying to host my book club, handling my mail before I could see it. The turning point came about 6 months into their stay. I returned from grocery shopping to find Allison had cleared out Frank's study, the one room I'd kept exactly as he left it, to create a home office for herself. Thomas said it was fine, she explained dismissively when I expressed my shock. "It's been years, Rosie. We need the space and you need to move on." I looked to Thomas for support, but he merely shrugged. "It makes sense, Mom. Dad wouldn't want his things gathering dust." That night, I discovered all of Frank's belongings had been boxed up and moved to the attic. His books, his collection of vintage fountain pens, even the leather chair where he'd sit reading the Sunday paper, all exiled without my permission. As time passed, the temporary arrangement stretched beyond a year, then 2. Thomas found work again, but somehow the topic of finding their own place never seemed to arise. Meanwhile, Allison's control of the household grew. She hired Jessica a nanny for the children without consulting me. A young woman who clearly viewed me as Allison's subordinate rather than the homeowner. Mrs. Andrews doesn't like it when people move her decorative pillows. I once overheard Jessica telling Jack when he was building a fort. It took me a moment to register that Mrs. Andrews referred to Allison, not me, though the house had been in my family name for generations. I tried maintaining peace, swallowing my objections to keep harmony for the children's sake. But as Thanksgiving approached this year, I felt a growing unease. Allison had been huddled in whispered conversations with Thomas, conversations that abruptly halted when I entered the room. Something was brewing, but I never imagined what would unfold at my dinner table. I spent 3 days preparing for Thanksgiving dinner. Up at dawn, brining the turkey, rolling out homemade pie crusts, polishing my mother's silver serving dishes that only emerged for special occasions. This holiday had always been my domain, the one time of year when my cooking skills truly shone. But even this wasn't sacred anymore. Allison swooped into the kitchen as I was preparing the stuffing my late mother's recipe that had been passed down for generations. "I think we should try something different this year," she announced, placing a grocery bag on the counter. I bought ingredients for a quinoa and cranberry stuffing. It's what we always had in my family. "I've already started the traditional stuffing," I replied, gesturing to my mixing bowl. "Well, you could make both, right? Our guests might appreciate having options." Her tone made it clear this wasn't a suggestion. By our guests, she meant the 4 couples she and Thomas had invited their friends, not mine. My 2 oldest friends had been told the table was already at capacity when they called to ask if they could join. I later discovered there were actually 2 empty seats at dinner. The meal itself was a beautiful spread, despite the tension simmering beneath the surface. 14 adults and 5 children gathered around my extended dining table. I sat at one end, smiling and passing dishes, while Allison held court at the opposite head, a position that traditionally belonged to me or Frank. During the second course, I excused myself to fetch more cranberry sauce from the kitchen. As I reached the swinging door, I heard Allison's voice, clearly not intended for my ears. "It's getting harder to manage her expectations," she was saying in a hushed tone. "She still thinks this is her show to run. Thomas agrees we need to start taking more control of household decisions before she makes another impulsive choice, like last month's bathroom renovation." My hands trembled as I pushed back into the dining room, cranberry sauce forgotten. The bathroom renovation had been the first independent decision I'd made about my own house in months, and they were discussing me as if I were an unruly child needing management. It was during dessert that Allison tapped her glass for attention. Her face glowed with excitement as Thomas stood beside her, arm draped around her shoulder. "We have a wonderful surprise," she announced. "Thomas has secured an amazing deal on a beach house rental in Florida for the next week. We're all leaving tonight, the kids, Jessica, and all of you wonderful friends joining us today." Murmurs of delight circulated the table. I sat frozen, fork suspended mid-air. "What about Rosie?" someone asked. Allison's smile didn't waver. "Oh, Rosie prefers staying home, don't you? Someone needs to watch the house before I could respond, she continued. Besides, after hosting such a wonderful dinner, I'm sure she'd appreciate some quiet time. As guests began excitedly discussing packing and departure times, Allison slid an envelope across the table toward me. Just a few things that need taking care of while we're gone, she said breezily. I opened it after everyone migrated to the living room. Inside was a card with a list. Deep clean kitchen and bathrooms. Shampoo living room carpet. Clear gutters before the forecasted rain. Holiday decorations should go up before our return. At the bottom, a postscript. The cleaning service contract ended last month. I cancelled it to save money, so you'll need to handle this yourself. I sat there surrounded by the remnants of the feast I'd prepared, holding a to-do list for my own home. Through the doorway, I could see Jessica, the nanny, packing up the children's things included in the vacation while I was left behind with chores. Within 2 hours, they were gone. No one helped clear the table. No one rinsed a single dish. The front door closed behind the last guest, and silence descended on my home, littered with the evidence of Thanksgiving dinner. I stood in my kitchen, surrounded by dirty dishes, holding that card in my trembling hands. And something inside me, something that had been bending and bending for 2 years, finally broke. That night, I couldn't sleep. Memories flooded back of all the boundaries that had been crossed, all the times I'd been marginalized in my own home. 3 months earlier, I had discovered charges on my credit card statement I couldn't account for. After calling the company, I learned Allison had somehow added herself as an authorized user. When confronted, she claimed it was a misunderstanding and that Thomas had told her it was fine to use my card for family expenses. Those expenses included a spa day for her and her friends' clothing I never saw her wear, and an expensive dinner where I wasn't present. Then there was the time I overheard her telling our next-door neighbor, Martha, that I was becoming a bit confused about financial matters, and that any discussions about property maintenance should go through her or Thomas. Martha, who'd been my friend for 20 years, looked uncomfortable, but nodded. I found my gardening tools moved to an inaccessible corner of the garage because Allison decided that space was better used for storing the children's outdoor toys. My favorite reading chair disappeared from the sunroom because it didn't match Allison's vision for the space. Even the thermostat had been programmed to temperatures I found uncomfortable, and I wasn't given the new code. But perhaps the most painful memory was Emma's birthday party 3 months ago. Despite being the child's grandmother, I learned about the party plans from the baker when I happened to pick up my own cake order. Allison had planned everything in my home without including me in any decisions. When I arrived home early from my doctor's appointment that day, Allison seemed annoyed by my presence. I was relegated to serving cake to children I didn't know, while Allison received compliments for the beautiful party. That night, as dawn approached and sleep eluded me, I called my best friend Diane. They left you a chore list after excluding you from their vacation plans. Diane's indignation burned through the phone line. Rosie, this isn't right. That's your house. I know, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. But they're my family. Where would they go? That's not your problem, Diane replied firmly. Thomas is a grown man with a good job now. They've had 2 years to save for their own place. Instead, they've been taking advantage of you while treating you like an unwanted house guest. Her words hit me like a splash of cold water. She was right. I'd been so afraid of being alone, so desperate to keep my family close, that I'd allowed myself to be erased from my own life. What should I do? I asked, my voice stronger now. What would Frank tell you to do? Diane asked gently. The answer came immediately in my late husband's no-nonsense voice. Stand up for yourself, Rosie girl. No one else will do it for you. By morning, my path was clear. My hands stopped shaking. For the first time in years, I felt absolutely certain of what needed to be done. I didn't waste any time. The moment business hours began, I called my attorney, Harold Friedman, who had helped with Frank's estate planning years earlier. I explained the situation and asked about my legal rights. The house is solely in your name, he confirmed. Yes, it was my parents' home left to me before I even met Frank. And there's no written rental agreement with your son and his family. No, nothing formal. It was supposed to be temporary. Harold's voice was reassuring. Then legally, they're considered month-to-month tenants at will. Normally, you'd need to provide notice for termination of tenancy, but given the circumstances, we can handle this differently. By noon, I had a locksmith at my door. Jim was the son of a former teaching colleague and asked no questions as he replaced every exterior lock on the house. Keys only for you, he confirmed. Only for me. I nodded firmly. Next came the professional cleaning service, not to handle Allison's list, but to help me with what needed to be done next. 3 women arrived with supplies and began working through the house, while I focused on the more personal task. I entered Thomas and Allison's bedroom, a space I hadn't been welcome in for months, and began carefully packing their belongings. Every item of clothing was folded neatly or hung in garment bags. Jewelry was secured in padded pouches. Toiletries were placed in plastic bins. I worked methodically, without anger, treating their possessions with more respect than they'd shown mine. The children's rooms were harder emotionally. I packed Emma's beloved stuffed animals and Jack's collection of dinosaurs, knowing they would be confused and upset by what was happening. For each child, I wrote a loving note explaining that Grandma's house would always be open to them for visits, and that none of this was their fault. I tucked a special gift in each suitcase, a silver locket for Emma, with our picture inside, and for Jack, his grandfather's pocket compass that he'd always admired. By evening, I had cleared out their personal belongings and arranged everything neatly in the garage, protected from the elements, but clearly removed from the house. "Are you sure about this?" asked Maggie, the head of the cleaning crew, as they finished up. "Looks like a lot of stuff for folks to suddenly find outside." "I'm sure," I replied, writing a check for their services. "And thank you for not judging me. Honey, at my age, I've seen enough family drama to write 10 soap operas. You do what you need to do." That evening, I went room by room through my house, reclaiming each space. I moved Frank's boxes back down from the attic and set up his study again, running my hands over his books and breathing in the fading scent of his leather chair. I readjusted the thermostat to my preferred temperature. I returned my reading chair to the sunroom. In the kitchen, I rearranged the cabinets to my liking, placing my frequently used items within easy reach again. I changed the passwords on my computer and all my accounts. I called the credit card company and reported my card stolen, requesting a new one with a new number. The final touch was a letter I wrote and placed in a sealed envelope taped to the front door beside the doorbell. I didn't rage or accuse. I simply stated facts. This was my home. They had outstayed their welcome. Their belongings were safely packed in the garage, and they needed to find alternative housing. I included information for 3 extended stay hotels nearby and noted that I'd paid for a week's accommodation at the Residence Inn as a transitional measure. With everything in place, I sat in my reclaimed living room and felt something I hadn't experienced in years: peace in my own home. The text came 6 days later. Landing in Boston at 2 p.m. Please have dinner ready for everyone by 7. Allison, no thank you for watching their house. No inquiry about how I was doing. Just another command. I didn't respond. At 6:45 p.m., I was sitting in Frank's study, watching the security camera feed on my new tablet. Another change I'd made during the week. The airport taxi pulled into the driveway, disgorging my son's family and their luggage. I took a deep breath and steeled myself. Thomas approached the front door, first key in hand. He tried the lock, frowning when it didn't turn. He tried again, jiggling the handle. "What's wrong?" Allison asked, shifting a sleeping Jack in her arms. "The key isn't working," Thomas muttered, trying again. Emma, overtired from travel, whined about being cold. Jessica, the nanny, stood awkwardly with the bags. "Let me try," Allison said, handing Jack to Thomas and pulling out her own key. When it also failed to work, she rang the doorbell repeatedly. I didn't move. Thomas noticed the envelope then and pulled it from the door. I watched as he read it, his expression morphing from confusion to disbelief. "Mom changed the locks," he said, his voice hollow. She says we need to find our own place, that our things are in the garage and she's booked us a hotel." Allison snatched the letter from him, her eyes scanning it frantically. "This is ridiculous. She can't do this. This is our home too." "Actually, it's not," Thomas said quietly, a realization seeming to dawn on him. "It's her house. It's always been her house." Allison's face contorted with rage. She pounded on the door while Emma began to cry. "Rosie, open this door right now. You can't do this to us." My phone buzzed with Thomas's call. After 3 rings, I answered. "Mom, what's going on? We can't get in." "I know, Thomas. Did you read my letter?" My voice was calmer than I expected. "Yes, but this is crazy. You can't just lock us out. Where are we supposed to go?" "I've paid for a week at the Residence Inn. The confirmation is in the envelope. That should give you time to find a rental." "A rental? Mom, we live with you." "No, Thomas. You were staying with me temporarily. It's been 2 years. That arrangement has ended." Allison grabbed the phone. "Listen to me, you ungrateful witch. After all we've done for you, keeping you company, helping maintain this big old house, this is how you repay us, by throwing us out without warning." I took a deep breath. "Allison, You left me a card instructing me to clean the entire house while you took a vacation I wasn't invited to. You've gradually pushed me out of decisions in my own home. You've disrespected my boundaries repeatedly. This isn't a sudden decision, it's been building for a long time. By now, lights were coming on in neighboring houses. Martha from next door had stepped onto her porch, watching the scene unfold. Mom, Thomas's voice returned softer now. Can we at least come in and talk about this? The kids are tired. It's cold out here. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but I held firm. No, Thomas. The conversation we needed to have should have happened months ago. I've made my decision. Your things are packed safely in the garage. The hotel is expecting you. You'll regret this, Allison hissed, before I could hear her thrust the phone back at Thomas. Mom, please, Thomas began. But something caught my attention on the camera. Allison had suddenly gone pale. She swayed on her feet, then collapsed onto the front step in a dramatic faint. Jessica rushed to her side, while Thomas ended our call to tend to his wife. I watched as Allison came to remarkably quickly, looking around with confusion, before her eyes hardened again with determination. I almost wavered then, seeing my grandchildren's frightened faces. But I remembered Diane's words and Frank's imagined advice. I couldn't go back to the way things had been. Sometimes love means standing firm. Eventually, after more unanswered knocking and calling, they gathered their immediate belongings from the garage and drove away. As their taillights disappeared down the street, I exhaled a breath I felt I'd been holding for 2 years. The fallout was immediate and intense. By morning, my phone was flooded with messages from family members and mutual friends. Thomas's sister-in-law called me heartless for putting children out on the street. My nephew suggested I was having a mental breakdown and should be evaluated. Several relatives I only saw at holidays vowed never to speak to me again. But there were supporters too. Diane, of course, who brought over wine to celebrate what she called my Independence Day. My brother James called from Arizona to say it was about damn time I stood up for myself. And surprisingly, my late husband's brother, who had never been particularly warm to me, sent a text saying simply, Frank would be proud. Meanwhile, Allison had taken to social media with a carefully crafted narrative. According to her posts, I had suffered some sort of psychiatric break, endangering my beloved grandchildren with my erratic behavior. She shared cropped photos of Emma crying on our doorstep, conveniently editing out the context. She started a fundraiser for their emergency housing situation, despite the fact I'd paid for a comfortable hotel suite. Thomas was notably absent from these online dramatics. 3 days after the lockout, he asked to meet me for coffee at a neutral location. He looked tired when he slid into the booth across from me, the weight of the past few days evident in the shadows under his eyes. How are the kids? I asked immediately. Confused, he admitted. They miss you and their things, though you packed everything they needed. We sat in uncomfortable silence until our coffees arrived. I want you to know, he finally said, that I've started looking at apartments. Allison wants to fight this legally, but, he sighed. I've consulted a lawyer. He confirmed, it's your house, you're right. I nodded. relieved he wasn't pursuing that avenue. I owe you an apology, Mom. I let things get out of hand. I didn't see how Allison was treating you, or maybe I didn't want to see it. His admission loosened something tight in my chest. Why didn't you ever look for your own place, Thomas? You've been back on your feet financially for over a year. He stared into his coffee. Honestly, it was convenient. We were saving money, and Allison kept saying, you needed us, that you'd be lost on your own. He looked up, his expression shameful. I know now that wasn't true. You're stronger than either of us gave you credit for. We established ground rules moving forward. The children could visit every Sunday initially with Thomas only. I wasn't ready to have Allison in my home again, and he understood. He asked if they could retrieve the rest of their belongings that weekend, and I agreed. When Thomas left, he hugged me tightly. I'm sorry, Mom, he whispered. I should have protected you better. As the weeks passed, the family drama gradually subsided. Those who had cut me off either maintained their distance or sheepishly returned to normal communication without mentioning their earlier condemnation. Allison's social media campaign gained little traction outside her immediate circle and eventually fizzled out when she found a new cause to champion. The most surprising development was Thomas's growing backbone in his marriage. During one Sunday visit, he mentioned casually that he had put his foot down about Allison's excessive spending. Another time he arrived with the children, but without the nanny explaining that they had decided Jessica's services were an unnecessary expense now that they were paying rent. By the 3-month mark, they had signed a lease on a small 3-bedroom house across town. It wasn't the luxury Allison had become accustomed to in my home, but it was clean, safe, and, most importantly, theirs. 6 months have passed since that Thanksgiving day, when I found myself alone with a sink full of dishes and a list of chores. Today, my home truly feels like mine again. I've painted the living room a warm sage green that Frank always admired, but Allison had vetoed. I've joined a widow support group that meets weekly for dinner and occasional weekend trips. I've connected with colleagues from my teaching days who had gradually stopped visiting when Allison made them feel unwelcome. Thomas and I have rebuilt our relationship on stronger footing. He comes by at least once a week, sometimes, with the children, sometimes alone. Our conversations are more honest now, more equal. He's no longer the little boy I need to protect, nor the ungrateful son who allowed my diminishment. He's a man finding his way, learning from his mistakes. The grandchildren have adjusted remarkably well. Emma and Jack now enjoy having 2 special homes, as Emma puts it. They've even developed a Sunday tradition of helping me bake cookies to take back to their house, something Allison surprisingly permits. As for Allison herself, our relationship remains strained but civil. She rarely accompanies the children on their visits, and when she does, she maintains a cold politeness. I've noticed she no longer wears designer clothes or the expensive jewelry she favored while living in my home. Thomas mentioned they're on a strict budget, now focused on saving for a down payment on their own house someday. Last Sunday, we had our first full family dinner since the lock-changing incident. It was tense at moments, but ultimately peaceful. Allison even complimented my cooking, which felt like an olive branch of sorts. The most profound change, however, has been within me. I wake each morning in my own home, make decisions without seeking approval, and live according to my own rhythms. I've learned that sometimes the greatest act of love isn't endless accommodation. It's establishing boundaries that demand respect. Would Frank be proud of me? I believe he would. Not for the pain I caused, which was never my intention, but for finally finding the courage to value myself. Have you ever had to make a difficult stand with family members who crossed your boundaries? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more about navigating complex family dynamics with grace and strength. And if you know someone who might need inspiration to reclaim their own power, share this video with them. Remember, it's never too late to teach others how to treat you with the respect you deserve. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it brings courage to those who need it most.